The gunshot echoed across the valley just as Charlotte Finley stepped off the stagecoach, dust swirling around her worn leather boots. Her heart leapt to her throat, not from the sound she'd heard plenty in Chicago during the riots, but from the realization that Whispering Pines, Colorado, might not be the peaceful refuge she'd imagined when she answered the advertisement for a housekeeper on the Rocking X Ranch. It was May 1878, and Charlotte had exactly $23 to her name, a single trunk of possessions, and the crushing weight of her father's debts pushing her toward this new life. At 24, she had never imagined herself heading west alone, but life had a way of appending even the most careful plans. "Don't worry, miss," said a weathered station master who noticed her startled expression. "That's just Noah Xavier testing his new Winchester. The man's particular about his firearms." He gestured toward the distant hills. "His ranch is about 5 miles yonder. Someone should be along shortly to fetch you." Charlotte nodded, trying to appear more composed than she felt. Chicago seemed impossibly distant now, along with its smokestacks and crowded streets. Here, the mountains loomed like ancient guardians over rolling grasslands that stretched toward the horizon. As she waited, Charlotte removed a letter from her pocket, rereading the agreement. Room, board, and $20 monthly to manage the household affairs of widower Noah Xavier. The salary wasn't much, but it was escape, freedom, a chance to rebuild, Miss Finley. She turned to face a boy of about 16, sitting tall on a chestnut mare. Another horse, a dappled gray, stood nearby with reins loosely tied to a hitching post. "I'm Daniel, Mr. Xavier's ranch hand. He sent me to bring you to Rocking X." The boy smiled broadly, revealing a missing tooth. "Hope you can ride, madam." "It's the only way to get there unless you want to wait 3 days for the supply wagon." Charlotte swallowed hard. She hadn't been on a horse since she was 12. "Of course I can ride," she lied, straightening her back. "I simply need assistance with my trunk. We'll send for it tomorrow." "Best just bring whatever you need for tonight," Daniel said, dismounting to help with her small carpet bag. The ride was painful. Every muscle in Charlotte's body protested as she struggled to maintain her seat on the gray mare. She was grateful when the sprawling ranch house finally appeared, nestled against a backdrop of pine-covered foothills. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, and the sound of hammering drifted from a nearby barn. "That'll be the boss," Daniel explained as they approached. "He's been building a new stable all spring." Charlotte dismounted awkwardly, wincing as her feet touched ground. She smoothed her travel-worn dress, wishing suddenly that she'd worn something more presentable. "Daniel, is that my new housekeeper?" The deep voice carried across the yard before its owner emerged from the barn's shadows. Noah Xavier was not what Charlotte had expected. The advertisement had mentioned a widower, so she'd imagined someone older, perhaps in his 50s with graying hair and a paunch. The man striding toward her couldn't have been more than 32. Tall and broad-shouldered, his chambray shirt stretched across a muscular chest. Dark hair curled from beneath his hat, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. His eyes, she noticed as he drew closer, were the precise color of a summer storm. "Mr. Xavier," she said, offering her hand. "Charlotte Finley, I've come about the housekeeper position." He removed his hat, revealing more of those dark curls, and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses. "You're younger than I expected, Miss Finley." "I assure you, I'm quite capable," Charlotte replied, meeting his gaze steadily despite her exhaustion. "I managed my father's household for 6 years before his passing." Something shifted in Noah's expression, recognition, perhaps, of shared loss. "Well, you're here now. Daniel will show you to your quarters. Supper's at 6. With that, he turned and walked back to the barn, leaving Charlotte to wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake. The housekeeper's quarters consisted of a small but comfortable bedroom and sitting area attached to the main house. The furnishings were simple but well made. A bed with a quilt in faded blues and reds, a chest of drawers, a rocking chair beside the window. Someone had placed wildflowers in a jar on the windowsill. That'd be Emma's doing, Daniel explained when he noticed Charlotte looking at them. She's Mr. Xavier's daughter, 8 years old and wild as a Mustang. I wasn't aware Mr. Xavier had a child, Charlotte said, surprised this detail had been omitted from their correspondence. Emma's the reason you're here, madam. Mr. Xavier's sister kept house until last month, but she's gone back east to care for their mother. Emma needs. Daniel hesitated. Well, she needs a woman's influence, been running half wild since her mama died. When did Mrs. Xavier pass? Charlotte asked gently. 3 years ago, influenza took her along with the baby she was carrying. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Boss hasn't been the same since. Throws himself into work, barely speaks some days. Charlotte's heart constricted. She knew too well the hollowness grief carved into a person. Where is Emma now? Probably hiding somewhere watching us, Daniel chuckled. She's shy with strangers. As if on cue, Charlotte caught movement at the window, a flash of dark hair and curious eyes before the little figure darted away. The first week at Rocking X was a blur of exhaustion. Charlotte rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Noah and his ranch hands, scrubbed years of neglect from the house, and attempted to establish some order in the chaotic household. Emma remained elusive, watching from doorways but fleeing whenever Charlotte tried to engage her. Noah himself was equally distant. He left at first light and returned for supper, speaking only when necessary. Charlotte found herself studying him at the dinner table, the way his hands moved as he ate, how his shoulders carried tension even in repose, the occasional softening around his eyes when Emma spoke. On her 8th day, Charlotte was hanging linens on the clothesline when she heard a small voice behind her. My mama used to sing when she did the washing. Charlotte turned slowly, not wanting to startle the child. Emma stood a few feet away, clutching a worn rag doll. Her dark hair, so like her father's, hung in tangled waves down her back, and her dress was smudged with dirt. Did she? Charlotte replied softly. What songs did she sing? I don't remember. Emma's voice held a note of distress. Papa says I was too little, but I should remember something, shouldn't I? Charlotte's heart broke a little. She knelt to meet Emma's eyes. Memory is a funny thing, especially when we're very young, but maybe we could make new songs if you'd like. Emma considered this, her small face serious. Can you braid hair? My doll Susanna needs her hair braided, and I never learned how. I'm excellent at braiding, Charlotte smiled. Would you like me to teach you? The girl nodded, and something like trust flickered across her face. That evening, when Noah returned from checking fence lines, he found his daughter and Charlotte sitting on the porch steps, their heads bent together over a picture book. Emma was laughing, a sound he hadn't heard in months, as Charlotte told a story about a rabbit that stole farmers' carrots. He stood watching them for a long moment, his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't name. When Emma spotted him and ran to his arms, he lifted her easily, burying his face in her hair to hide the sudden wetness in his eyes. Miss Finley taught me about the stars, Papa. Did you know the stars make pictures, constellations? Noah corrected gently, glancing at Charlotte over his daughter's head. Their eyes met, and he nodded slightly acknowledgement, gratitude. Miss Finley says she'll show me more tomorrow night if it's clear, Emma continued excitedly. Can I stay up late enough to see them, please? Noah's gaze lingered on Charlotte. I suppose that would be acceptable, he said, his voice rougher than usual, if Miss Finley doesn't mind. I'd be delighted, Charlotte replied, and for the first time since her arrival, Noah Xavier smiled at her, a small, tentative curve of his lips that transformed his face entirely. That night, lying in bed, Charlotte realized she was in dangerous territory. It would be too easy to grow attached to Emma's bright spirit and eager mind. And Noah. The brief moment of connection on the porch had awakened something she'd thought long buried, a flicker of warmth, of possibility. Charlotte reminded herself sternly that she was an employee, nothing more. Noah Xavier had hired her to bring order to his home, not to intrude upon his grief or presume familiarity. She needed this position desperately. Sentimentality was a luxury she couldn't afford. But the next morning, when she entered the kitchen to find Noah already there, brewing coffee in the pre-dawn light, the careful boundaries she'd constructed wavered. "You're up early," she remarked, reaching for her apron. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. "Coffee." Charlotte accepted the offered cup, surprised by this deviation from their established routine. "Thank you." They stood in companionable silence as the kitchen gradually brightened with dawn light. Finally, Noah spoke. "Emma talked about you for an hour before falling asleep last night." Charlotte felt her cheeks warm. "She's a remarkable child." "She is." Noah turned to face her fully. "Miss Finley, please call me Charlotte." A pause. "Charlotte, then. I want to thank you for your patience with Emma. She's been difficult since her mother died." "My sister Caroline tried, but they never connected the way you seem to have." "Children need consistency," Charlotte said. "And understanding." Noah studied her, his gray eyes intent. "You seem to know a great deal about children for someone who hasn't any of her own." "I helped raise my younger siblings after my mother passed," Charlotte explained. "4 of them." "I'm sorry for your loss," Noah said, and the simple sincerity in his voice touched her. "It was long ago," Charlotte replied. "I was 12. Noah nodded, understanding in his eyes. They stood looking at each other across the kitchen, and Charlotte felt something shift between them, recognition of shared experience, of pain weathered and survived. The moment broke when Daniel burst through the door, bringing news of a mountain lion attacking the sheep in the north pasture. Noah set down his coffee cup and grabbed his rifle, all business once more. "We'll finish this conversation another time," he said to Charlotte as he headed for the door. It wasn't quite a promise, but it felt like one. June slipped into July, and the rhythm of ranch life began to feel familiar to Charlotte. She rose with the sun, prepared meals for Noah and his ranch hands, managed the household accounts, and slowly coaxed the neglected house back to life. In the evenings, she taught Emma to read and write, to sew simple stitches, to identify the wildflowers that grew in the meadows. Noah remained largely a mystery, though Charlotte often felt his eyes following her as she moved about the house. Occasionally, he would join them for Emma's lessons, listening quietly from his chair by the fire. These moments, the 3 of them together in the warm lamplight, stirred dangerous longings in Charlotte's heart. One sweltering afternoon in late July, Charlotte was picking beans in the kitchen garden when she heard the commotion, horses approaching at speed, men shouting. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun to see Noah and his hands galloping toward the house. Noah was slumped in his saddle, supported by Daniel riding alongside him. Charlotte dropped her basket and ran toward them, heart hammering against her ribs. "What happened?" "Snake spooked his horse," Daniel explained as they carefully helped Noah dismount. "Threw him against some rocks. Think his ribs are busted, maybe worse." Noah's face was gray with pain, blood staining his shirt. "I'm fine," he insisted, though his grimace belied the words. "Of course you are," Charlotte said firmly. "And you'll be even better once we get you inside and tend to those injuries." Emma appeared on the porch, her eyes wide with fear. "Papa, your father's had an accident, Emma," Charlotte explained calmly. "He's going to be fine, but I need you to fetch clean linens from the press and heat some water. Can you do that for me?" The girl nodded solemnly and disappeared inside. Grateful to have a task, with Daniel's help, Charlotte got Noah settled in his bedroom, a space she had cleaned but never entered while he was present. It was spare and masculine, dominated by a large 4-poster bed and a chest of drawers topped with a silver-framed photograph of a smiling blonde woman. "Elizabeth," Noah murmured, following Charlotte's gaze to the photograph. "Emma's mother," Charlotte nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She busied herself cutting away his bloody shirt, revealing a muscled torso mottled with bruising. 3 ribs were visibly broken, pressing against his skin at unnatural angles. "This will hurt," she warned as she began to clean the abrasions. Noah sucked in a sharp breath but remained still under her ministrations. "You've done this before." My brother was always getting himself into scrapes, Charlotte explained, concentrating on her task, and my father was ill for many years before he died. I learned what was necessary. Noah watched her face as she worked, her expression focused and serene despite the gruesome task. "You're not what I expected, Charlotte Finley." "Oh," she asked, applying salve to a particularly nasty cut along his shoulder. "What did you expect? Someone older, less capable, less—" He trailed off, wincing as she began wrapping his ribs tightly with clean bandages. "Less what, Mr. Xavier?" Charlotte prompted, suddenly curious about how he saw her. "Less everything," he admitted quietly. Their eyes met, and Charlotte felt heat rise to her cheeks at the intensity of his gaze. Emma's return with the hot water broke the moment. Charlotte stepped back, her hands still trembling slightly as she thanked the child. For the next week, Charlotte divided her time between her usual duties and caring for Noah, who was confined to bed under doctor's orders. They developed a routine breakfast brought on a tray, changing bandages mid-morning, reading aloud from the newspaper in the afternoon while Emma napped. These quiet hours alone together gradually wore away their reserve. Noah spoke of his childhood in Missouri, his decision to head west after the war, meeting Elizabeth when he stopped to water his horse at her father's ranch. Charlotte shared stories of Chicago, her siblings now scattered across the country, her father's gambling debts that had left her destitute and desperate for work. "Is that why you answered my advertisement?" Noah asked one afternoon. "The debts," Charlotte hesitated, then nodded. "I had few options, women alone in Chicago, the respectable employment opportunities are limited." Noah's expression darkened. "And the men who came calling, I imagine, were not offering respectable arrangements." "No," Charlotte admitted, "they were not." Noah was silent for a long moment. "I'm glad you came here instead," he said finally. The simple statement hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to address. By the end of July, Noah was well enough to move about the house, though still unable to resume his full duties. He took to sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching as Charlotte taught Emma to play cat's cradle or identify constellations in the darkening sky. Sometimes, when Charlotte glanced his way, she found him watching her rather than the stars, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. One such evening, after Emma had been tucked into bed, Charlotte brought Noah a cup of coffee and joined him on the porch steps, her own mug warming her hands against the night's chill. "The doctor says you can return to light work next week," she remarked, gazing out at the silvery landscape bathed in moonlight. "Are you eager to be rid of me as a patient?" Noah asked, his tone lighter than usual. Charlotte smiled. "You've been surprisingly accommodating for a man used to giving orders rather than taking them." "High praise indeed," Noah chuckled, then winced as the movement jarred his healing ribs. "Though I suspect Emma has been a more difficult patient than I over the years." "She's strong-willed," Charlotte agreed, "like her father." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, listening to the night sounds: crickets chirping, an owl hooting in the distance, the soft nickering of horses in the barn. "Charlotte," Noah said finally, his voice low, "I need to ask you something." She turned to face him, suddenly nervous at his serious tone. "Yes. Would you consider staying on at Rocking X, not just as housekeeper, but as Emma's teacher? She's flourishing under your care, and the thought of sending her away to school in Denver." He trailed off, shaking his head. Relief flooded through Charlotte, followed immediately by confusion. What had she expected, or perhaps hoped he would ask? "Of course I'll stay, if that's what you want," she replied carefully. Noah's eyes met hers, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "What I want," he began, then stopped himself. "What would be best for Emma is consistency, structure, a woman's guidance. And you think I can provide those things?" Charlotte asked softly. "I know you can." "You already have." Noah reached out, hesitated, then lightly touched her hand where it rested on the porch step between them. "You've brought life back to this house, Charlotte, to Emma, to me." The simple touch of his fingers against hers sent warmth cascading through Charlotte's body. Dangerous, she thought distantly. This is dangerous territory. I'm glad, she whispered, unable to find more adequate words. Noah's fingers tightened briefly around hers, then withdrew. It's getting late, he said, his voice rough. We should both get some rest. Charlotte nodded and stood, gathering their empty mugs. As she turned to go inside, Noah spoke again. Charlotte, she paused, looking back at him. Thank you for everything. The simple gratitude in his voice followed her into dreams where his hands weren't quite so hesitant, and morning came all too quickly. August brought the busiest time of year at Rocking X. Cattle needed moving to higher pastures before the final push to get them to market in September. Noah, fully recovered, was gone from dawn until dusk most days, returning only for meals. Charlotte found herself missing their conversations, the quiet evenings on the porch that had become a cherished ritual during his convalescence. Emma, too, seemed to feel her father's absence keenly. "Why can't Papa stay home with us?" she asked one afternoon as Charlotte taught her to make biscuits. "Your father has important work to do," Charlotte explained gently. "The cattle need tending so we can sell them and have money for the winter." Emma considered this, her small hands covered in flour. "But he's always working. Even when he's home, he's thinking about work." Charlotte couldn't argue with the child's assessment. "Your father carries many responsibilities," she said carefully. "Sometimes it's hard for grown-ups to set those aside." "Mama used to make him laugh," Emma said, her voice small. "I don't remember much, but I remember that. Now he never laughs." Charlotte's heart ached at the simple observation. "People show happiness in different ways," she said, helping Emma shape the dough. "Sometimes when people are very sad, it takes a long time for laughter to come back. But it's been forever," Emma protested. "And he smiles when he looks at you. I've seen him." Charlotte felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Emma, he does. Especially when you don't notice him watching. His face gets all soft, like when he looks at the picture of Mama." Charlotte didn't know how to respond to this startling observation. The idea that Noah might harbor feelings for her beyond professional respect seemed both thrilling and terrifying. She had come to care deeply for both Xaviers, more deeply than was wise for a woman in her position. "Your biscuits are looking wonderful," she said instead, deflecting the conversation. "Your father will be very impressed when he tastes them tonight." The harvest dance held in the nearby town of Pine Creek each August was the social event of the season. Charlotte had heard the ranch hands discussing it for weeks, debating which girls they would ask to dance, what they would wear. "You'll come with us, won't you?" Emma asked excitedly one morning. "Papa always takes me, but it's more fun with a lady." "We can wear pretty dresses and put flowers in our hair." Charlotte hesitated. "I'm not sure that would be appropriate, Emma. The dance is for families and couples." "But we are a family," Emma insisted with a child's logic. "You and me and Papa." The words pierced Charlotte's heart. How easy it would be to pretend, for just one night, that she belonged with them in the way Emma imagined. "I'll speak to your father about it," Charlotte promised, not expecting Noah to agree. To her surprise, when she broached the subject that evening after Emma had gone to bed, Noah seemed pleased by the idea. "Emma's right, we always attend. It would mean a great deal to her if you came with us," he said. Then, with uncharacteristic hesitation, "And to me." Charlotte looked up sharply, searching his face. "To you," Noah cleared his throat, suddenly interested in the ember he was prodding in the fireplace. "You deserve some enjoyment after all your hard work these past months, and he met her eyes briefly. "I would be honored to escort both my girls to the dance." "My girls." The casual phrase sent a flood of warmth through Charlotte's chest. "Then I would be delighted to accompany you," she said, hoping her voice didn't betray the tumult of her emotions. The night of the dance arrived clear and warm, with stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. Charlotte dressed carefully in her best gown, a slate blue silk she'd remodeled from one of her mother's dresses. She pinned her hair up, allowing a few tendrils to frame her face, and tucked a sprig of white wildflowers behind one ear, as Emma had insisted they both must do. When she emerged from her room, Noah was waiting in the parlor. He wore a clean black suit, his dark hair slicked back, his face freshly shaven. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and the expression that crossed his face when he saw her made Charlotte's breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "As do you," Charlotte replied, flustered by the naked admiration in his eyes. "Handsome, I mean, very handsome." A smile tugged at the corner of Noah's mouth. "I know what you meant." Emma came bounding down the stairs then, resplendent in a dress of pale yellow cotton, her dark curls tamed into neat braids. "We match," she exclaimed, noticing the flowers in Charlotte's hair identical to her own. "So we do," Charlotte laughed, kneeling to straighten Emma's sash. "The prettiest ladies at the dance, I'd say." Noah watched them with an expression Charlotte couldn't quite interpret, tenderness mingled with something deeper, more complicated. "My girls," he said softly, offering an arm to each of them. "Shall we?" The town hall had been transformed for the occasion with paper lanterns, garlands of late summer wildflowers, and tables laden with food brought by every family in the county. A small band played lively tunes in the corner, and couples of all ages swirled across the wooden floor. Charlotte felt eyes on them as they entered the widowed rancher, his daughter, and the woman who was neither family nor exactly servant. She lifted her chin, determined to ignore any whispers or speculation. Emma was immediately swept into a circle of children playing a clapping game near the punch table. Noah kept his hand at the small of Charlotte's back, guiding her through the crowd to greet neighbors and friends. "Everyone's staring," Charlotte murmured after their fifth introduction. "Let them," Noah replied, unconcerned. "Most are just curious. It's been a long time since I've brought anyone to a social gathering." Before Charlotte could respond, the band struck up a waltz and Noah turned to face her fully. "Would you do me the honor?" he asked, extending his hand. Charlotte hesitated only briefly before placing her fingers in his. "I warn you, it's been many years since I've danced." "I'll lead," Noah promised, drawing her onto the floor, his hand settled at her waist, firm and warm through the silk of her dress. Charlotte rested her palm against his shoulder, hyper-aware of every point of contact between them as they began to move with the music. Noah was an excellent dancer, guiding her with subtle pressure and absolutely certainty. Charlotte found herself relaxing into his arms, trusting him completely as they circled the floor. "You dance very well for a reclusive rancher," she observed, slightly breathless. Noah smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his features. "Elizabeth insisted I learn properly before we married. Said she wouldn't have a husband who couldn't waltz." The mention of his wife didn't sting as Charlotte might have expected. Instead, she felt a surge of gratitude toward the woman who had loved him first. "She sounds wonderful." "She was," Noah agreed, his eyes distant for a moment before refocusing on Charlotte's face. "She would have liked you, I think." "I hope so," Charlotte said softly. Something shifted in Noah's expression, an intensity gathering behind his eyes as they continued to move together. "Charlotte," he began, his voice low. "There's something I've been meaning to, Papa, Miss Finley." Emma appeared suddenly beside them, tugging at Noah's jacket. "Come quick, they're about to call the square dance and Mrs. Abernathy says families should dance together." The moment shattered. Noah released Charlotte with obvious reluctance and allowed his daughter to pull them both toward the center of the floor where other families were gathering. The rest of the evening passed in a whirl of music and laughter. Charlotte found herself partnered with Noah for several more dances, each time aware of the growing tension between them, a current of unspoken feelings that seemed to strengthen with every shared smile, every brush of hands. It was nearly midnight when they finally headed home, Emma asleep against Noah's shoulder as he drove the wagon. Charlotte sat beside him, acutely conscious of his proximity in the darkness, the way their shoulders occasionally touched with the wagon's movement. "She's completely exhausted," Charlotte whispered, smoothing Emma's hair back from her flushed face. "She'll sleep until noon tomorrow," Noah predicted with a fond smile. "Worth it, though. I haven't seen her so happy in a long time." Nor you, Charlotte observed before she could stop herself. Noah glanced at her, his expression softening. No, he agreed quietly. Not in a very long time. When they reached the ranch, Noah carried Emma inside while Charlotte lit lamps and turned down beds. They worked together to change the sleeping child into her nightgown and tuck her in, moving in the easy synchronicity of a long-established partnership. In the hallway outside Emma's room, Charlotte paused, suddenly shy. I should retire as well, it's late. Charlotte, Noah said softly, catching her hand as she turned to go. Wait, please. She faced him, her heart hammering against her ribs. In the dim lamplight, his eyes were dark and intent on hers. I meant to tell you earlier before Emma interrupted, he said, still holding her hand. These past months, having you here has changed everything. For Emma, yes, but also for me. Charlotte couldn't look away from his face, from the naked emotion there. Noah, let me finish, please, he said gently. I never expected to feel this way again after Elizabeth died. I thought that part of me was buried with her, but you, he exhaled shakily. You woke something in me I thought was gone forever. Charlotte felt tears threatening. I didn't come here looking for this, she whispered. Whatever this is between us, I know. Noah stepped closer, raising his free hand to lightly touch her cheek. Neither did I, but here we are. Here we are, Charlotte echoed, her voice barely audible. For a long moment they stood perfectly still, poised on the edge of something momentous. Then Noah lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, a question rather than a demand. Charlotte answered by leaning into him slightly, her fingers tightening around his. When Noah drew back, his expression was a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. I should let you rest, he said, though he made no move to release her hand. Charlotte nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She slipped her fingers from his grasp and retreated to her room, where she sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, touching her lips and trying to make sense of the tumult in her heart. The next morning brought an unexpected complication. Charlotte was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when a wagon pulled into the yard, carrying her trunk from the stage-coach station in town. Been meaning to fetch this for months, the driver explained cheerfully. Finally had business this way. Charlotte thanked him and asked Daniel to help bring the trunk to her room. As they maneuvered it through the narrow doorway, the latch broke, spilling some of its contents onto the floor. I'll fix that clasp for you, Daniel offered, kneeling to help gather the scattered items. Thank you, that's very kind, Charlotte replied, reaching for a packet of letters that had fallen from a hidden compartment in the trunk's lid. Daniel picked up a newspaper clipping before she could retrieve it. His brow furrowed as he glanced at the headline, Finley investment scheme leaves hundreds destitute. Charlotte snatched the clipping from his hand, her face burning. Thank you, Daniel, I can manage the rest. The young man looked confused by her sudden sharpness, but nodded and left the room. Charlotte sank onto the edge of her bed, the damning newspaper article clutched in her trembling hand. She had been so careful to leave this part of her past behind in Chicago. Her father's financial crimes had ruined countless lives and left the Finley name disgraced. Charlotte had changed nothing when she came west. She hadn't needed to, being so far from the scandal, but she had never spoken of the true nature of her father's debts. Now the evidence was here, in black and white. What if Daniel mentioned it to Noah? What would he think of her then? Charlotte spent the day in a state of anxiety, jumping at every sound, waiting for the moment when Noah would confront her with her deception. By evening, when he returned from checking the north pasture, her nerves were frayed to breaking. Is something wrong? Noah asked over supper, noticing her distraction. You've hardly touched your food. I'm fine, Charlotte insisted, forcing a smile. Just tired from last night's festivities, I suppose. Noah studied her face but didn't press the issue. After Emma was in bed, however, he found Charlotte on the porch, staring out at the darkening landscape. Now are you going to tell me what's troubling you? He asked, settling beside her on the steps. Charlotte took a deep breath. My trunk arrived today. Noah waited, clearly not understanding the significance. Inside was evidence of why I really left Chicago. Charlotte couldn't meet his eyes. My father wasn't simply in debt, Noah, he was a criminal. He swindled people, decent, hard-working people, out of their life savings with fraudulent investment schemes. She felt rather than saw Noah stiffen beside her. When he died, everything came to light. There was nothing left to repay his victims. Some lost everything. Charlotte's voice shook. I came west not just because I needed work, but because I couldn't bear to face the people he'd hurt, their hatred, their judgment. And you thought I would judge you for your father's crimes? Noah asked quietly. Charlotte finally looked at him. Wouldn't you? The Finley name is ruined in Chicago. If people here knew, you are not your father, Noah interrupted firmly. You've done nothing wrong, Charlotte. I benefited from his crimes, she whispered. The fine house we lived in, the clothes I wore, my education, all paid for with stolen money. Noah was silent for a long moment, considering. Did you know, he finally asked, about what he was doing? No, Charlotte said immediately. Not until after he died. I would never have condoned it. Then you have nothing to be ashamed of. Noah reached for her hand, holding it firmly between both of his. We don't choose our parents or their actions, Charlotte. We can only choose our own path forward. Charlotte felt tears well in her eyes. You don't think less of me for being honest about a painful truth. Noah shook his head. I think more of you, if anything. The relief that flooded through Charlotte was so intense she swayed slightly. Noah steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. Is that why you've been so skittish today? He asked gently. You thought I'd send you away if I knew. Charlotte nodded mutely. Noah's expression softened. Charlotte Finley, if you think I could let you go over something like this, or for any reason at all, really then you don't know me very well yet. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, weighted with significance. Charlotte searched Noah's face and found nothing but sincerity there. I'd like to know you better, she said softly. Noah's eyes darkened. He raised one hand to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as he leaned forward to press his lips to hers. Unlike their first kiss, this one held certainty, a promise rather than a question. Charlotte melted into him, her hands finding their way to his shoulders as the kiss deepened. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unevenly, Noah rested his forehead against hers. I think I'm falling in love with you, Charlotte, he whispered. I didn't expect it, I didn't look for it, but there it is. Charlotte closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the tide of emotion washing through her. Noah, a scream from inside the house shattered the moment. They sprang apart, recognizing Emma's voice raised in terror. Papa, Charlotte, help! They raced inside to find Emma standing in the parlor, wide-eyed with fear as flames licked up the curtains near the fireplace. A branch had fallen from the fire, landing on the curtain's edge while they were outside. Get water, Noah shouted, grabbing a blanket to beat at the flames. Charlotte ran for the kitchen pump, filling buckets as quickly as she could while Emma sobbed in the corner. Together, she and Noah managed to douse the fire before it spread beyond the window frame, but the parlor was smoke-filled and water-soaked. Is everyone all right? Noah asked, his face streaked with soot as he gathered Emma into his arms. I'm sorry, Papa, the little girl hiccuped. I was reading by the fire and fell asleep. The book fell, and I think it knocked out an ember when I woke up and saw the flames. It's not your fault, Noah soothed, stroking her hair. The important thing is you're safe. Charlotte surveyed the damage. One curtain destroyed, the window frame scorched, water damage to the floor and rug. It could have been much worse, she observed with relief. Noah looked up at her, still holding Emma. If we'd been any further away. The implication hung in the air. If they'd been out in the barn, or if Charlotte had been in her quarters with the door closed, Emma might not have been able to call for help in time. But we weren't, Charlotte said firmly, kneeling beside them to smooth Emma's tangled hair. We were right here, exactly where we needed to be. Later, after they'd cleaned up as much as possible and put Emma back to bed, Noah found Charlotte in the kitchen making tea to settle her nerves. That was quick thinking with the water, he said, leaning against the doorframe. Charlotte smiled weakly. Years of practice managing household disasters, though none quite so dramatic. Noah crossed to her, taking the teacup from her trembling hands and setting it aside. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. Charlotte sank into his embrace, the events of the day, her confession, their interrupted moment on the porch, the fire finally catching up with her. "I don't know what I would have done if anything had happened to either of you," Noah murmured into her hair. Charlotte drew back slightly to look up at him. "Noah," he silenced her with a gentle finger against her lips. "I know it's fast, I know it might seem foolish or impulsive, but life is too short and too uncertain to waste time pretending I don't know what I want." Charlotte's heart hammered against her ribs. "And what is it you want?" "You," Noah said simply. "You and me and Emma, a family, not someday, not when more time has passed, but now. Tonight's fire reminded me how quickly everything can change, how fragile life is." Charlotte stared at him, scarcely able to believe what she was hearing. "Are you asking? I'm asking you to marry me, Charlotte Finley." Noah took her hands in his eyes never leaving her face. "I love you. I think I've loved you since that first morning in the kitchen when you stood there in your apron looking exhausted but determined to make a place for yourself here." Tears filled Charlotte's eyes. "You barely knew me then." "I knew enough," Noah insisted. "I've watched you these past months with Emma, with the household, with me. You belong here, Charlotte, with us." Charlotte thought of the advertisement that had brought her west, of the desperate woman who had stepped off the stagecoach with nothing but hope and determination. How far she had come since then. "Yes," she whispered, a smile breaking through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." Noah's answering smile was radiant. He gathered her into his arms again, lifting her feet off the floor as he spun her in a circle. Charlotte laughed, clinging to his shoulders, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "When?" Noah asked when he set her down, still holding her close. "How soon can you be ready? How soon can the preacher get here?" Charlotte countered, surprising herself with her eagerness. Noah laughed. "I'll ride into town tomorrow. Reverend Miller owes me a favor. I fixed his roof last spring." "What about Emma?" Charlotte asked suddenly. "Shouldn't we discuss this with her first?" "You're right, of course," Noah agreed, though the excitement in his eyes didn't dim. "Though I suspect she'll be overjoyed. She's been none too subtle about wanting you to stay forever." Charlotte smiled, remembering Emma's words at the dance. "We are a family. First thing tomorrow, then." Noah nodded, then lowered his head to kiss her once more, a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. Emma's reaction the next morning was everything they had hoped for. She shrieked with delight, flinging herself into Charlotte's arms with such force that they both tumbled onto the sofa. "Does this mean you'll be my mama now?" Emma asked, her eyes shining with hope. Charlotte glanced at Noah, who nodded encouragingly. "If you'd like that," she replied carefully. "Though I would never try to replace your mother. She'll always be special to you and your father." Emma considered this solemnly. "I think Mama would want me to have a new mama to love me, and I already love you, so it's perfect." Charlotte hugged the child tightly, tears threatening again. "I love you too, Emma, very much." Noah joined them on the sofa, wrapping his arms around them both. "My girls," he murmured contentedly. They were married 2 weeks later on a Sunday afternoon beneath the ancient cottonwood tree behind the house. Reverend Miller officiated, and the entire community turned out to witness the union of the widowed rancher and the Eastern woman who had captured his heart. Charlotte wore a gown of cream-colored silk that the women of Pine Creek had helped her fashion from materials ordered specially from Denver. Emma stood beside her, proudly holding a bouquet of late summer wildflowers identical to Charlotte's own. As she spoke her vows, Charlotte looked into Noah's eyes and saw their future reflected, their years stretching ahead, filled with love and purpose, with challenges they would face together, with a family that would grow and change but remain rooted in the bond they formed that day. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Miller declared with a broad smile. "Mr. Xavier, you may kiss your bride." Noah didn't hesitate. He gathered Charlotte into his arms and kissed her with a passion that elicited good-natured cheers from the assembled guests. When they broke apart, both laughing and slightly embarrassed, Emma wiggled between them, demanding to be included in the embrace. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with dancing and feasting under lantern light in the ranch yard. As darkness fell, Charlotte found herself standing slightly apart, watching Noah swing Emma in circles to a lively fiddle tune. "You've brought joy back to this place," came a voice beside her. Charlotte turned to find Martha Peterson, Noah's nearest neighbor, watching the scene with approval. "It was already here," Charlotte replied. "It just needed coaxing out." Martha patted her hand. "Don't sell yourself short, my dear. That man was a shell after Elizabeth died. Now look at him, he's whole again." Charlotte followed Martha's gaze to Noah, who caught her eye across the yard and smiled a smile so full of love and promise it made her breath catch. "I'm the fortunate one," Charlotte said softly. Martha chuckled. "That's how it should be, both feeling blessed to have found the other." Later that night, after the guests had departed and Emma was asleep, Charlotte stood in the bedroom she would now share with Noah, nervous as any new bride despite the months of growing intimacy between them. When Noah entered, closing the door softly behind him, she turned to face him with her heart in her eyes. "Mrs. Xavier," he said, the words like a caress as he crossed to her. "That will take some getting used to," Charlotte admitted with a small smile. "We have a lifetime for that." Noah reached for her, drawing her into his arms with gentle certainty. As they came together, the last barriers between them falling away, Charlotte knew she had found her true home not in the ranch house or the wild Colorado landscape, but in the heart of the man who held her and the family they were building together. Spring came early to Whispering Pines the following year. The ranch flourished under their joint care, with Charlotte managing the household accounts so efficiently that they were able to purchase additional grazing land from a neighbor moving back east. Emma thrived with Charlotte's guidance, growing into a confident, curious girl who devoured books as quickly as Charlotte could order them from Denver. Together, the three of them weathered the harsh winter storms, the challenges of ranch life, and the occasional raised eyebrows from those who thought Charlotte had married above her station. In late April, as wildflowers began carpeting the meadows in brilliant patches of color, Charlotte shared the news she'd been certain of for weeks. They were expecting a child. Noah's response was everything she could have hoped for. He lifted her off her feet in a jubilant embrace, his face alight with joy and wonder as he placed a reverent hand against her still flat stomach. "A baby," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Our baby." Emma was equally thrilled, immediately assuming the role of protective older sister. She accompanied Charlotte everywhere, solemnly informing ranch hands and visitors alike that they mustn't let Mrs. Xavier lift anything heavy or stay on her feet too long. As Charlotte's body changed with the growing life inside her, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this place of belonging. The desperate young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 1 year ago could never have imagined the happiness that awaited her. On a golden afternoon in early November, with the first snow dusting the distant mountains, Charlotte gave birth to a healthy son. Noah paced outside the bedroom door while Martha Peterson and the local midwife attended her, his face lined with anxiety until the infant's first cry pierced the air. When he was finally allowed to enter, he found Charlotte propped against pillows, their son cradled in her arms. Emma sat beside her, gently touching the baby's tiny fingers with an expression of absolute wonder. "Come meet your son," Charlotte said softly, her face radiant despite her exhaustion. Noah approached the bed almost reverently, sinking down beside his family. "He's perfect," he whispered, gently tracing the curve of the baby's cheek, "just like his mother." "What shall we call him?" Charlotte asked. Noah considered the tiny face, already showing signs of his mother's delicate features and his father's dark coloring. "What about James? After your father?" Charlotte looked at him in surprise. Despite her confession about her father's misdeeds, she had never expected Noah to suggest honoring the man's memory. "Are you certain?" she asked, searching his face. Noah nodded. "The past is past, Charlotte. This child represents our future." "Besides," he added with a small smile, "names are just borrowed for a while. He'll make his own meaning for it." Charlotte felt tears well in her eyes. "James Noah Xavier," she said, testing the name. "It's perfect." "Like our family," Emma declared with a child's certainty, snuggling against Charlotte's side as Noah wrapped his arm around them all. Looking at the faces of her husband and children, Charlotte knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. She had come to Whispering Pines with nothing but hope and determination, seeking only employment and sanctuary. Instead, she had found a home, a family, and a love deeper and more enduring than she had ever dared to imagine. And as baby James opened his eyes to gaze up at her eyes, that held all the promise of their shared future, Charlotte Xavier knew that her heart's journey was only just beginning.